Why did they stop talking the moment she stepped onto the tarmac? The heat was already rising off the Nevada desert in shimmering waves, curling the air, bending the light around her boots. A faint scent of jet fuel lingered in the breeze as the military transport's engines wound down behind her. Sarah Chun stepped onto the concrete as if it might bite her. Not because she feared the ground. She'd walked onto stranger, more dangerous soil in her 12 years as a Marine Staff Sergeant, but because of where she was. This place didn't welcome outsiders, not ones without a SEAL trident on their chest. Certainly not women. Her right shoulder carried a duffel nothing. Special military issue. The fabric faded from sandstorms half a world away. In her left hand, she carried a black rifle case with chipped edges and a hinge that had seen better days. It hung low, dragging slightly at her arm, heavier in meaning than in weight. She took in the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility ahead of her. Concrete, steel, razor wire, no banners, no flags fluttering in the wind. This wasn't the kind of place that needed to announce itself. Its reputation was enough. The world's most elite sniper school. Only the best of the best made it this far. Navy SEALs, Delta Force operators, the rare Marine who had clawed their way through blood, grit, and politics to get an invitation. Sarah was 10 steps in when the whisper started. "Is that a Marine?" One voice said, just loud enough to carry. A laugh followed. The kind of laugh men used when they didn't think you belonged. Near the shade of a Humvee, a group of operators lounged in the heat, as if the desert itself feared to touch them. They wore the trident insignia like kings wore crowns, polished, obvious, heavy with meaning. They radiated casual dominance, the kind that came from years of never having to prove their worth twice. One of them leaned forward, squinting. "Looks like they're scraping the bottom of the barrel now," he muttered, his grin sharp. Sarah kept walking, the neutral set of her mouth didn't change, but her grip on the rifle case tightened. She'd expected this. Marines weren't supposed to be here, and a woman in a room full of men who had built their legends on testosterone and war stories. That was a target all its own. But she hadn't fought her way through ambush, deployments, and a dozen invisible battles inside her own chain of command just to be intimidated by playground politics. Inside the gear inspection bay, the air smelled of oil and solvent. Conversations overlapped ballistics jargon, jokes, the metallic click of action cycling. Operators moved between tables, unpacking their rifles with the reverence of priests laying out sacred relics. Carbon fiber stocks gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Titanium bolts slid smoothly into place. Scopes so clear they could pierce the horizon were polished with soft claws. As if any speck of dust might cost a man his shot, it reminded Sarah of kids on Christmas morning, only here. The toys cost more than most people's cars. She found an empty table in the far corner and set down her duffel. The zipper hissed open, and she began laying out her gear in quiet. Deliberate order. Cleaning kit, ammunition boxes, neatly labeled, rangefinder old, scratched, but functional. Finally, she unclipped the latches on her rifle case. The sound was louder than she expected, or maybe the silence that followed just made it seem that way. Her rifle didn't belong here. The stock was an earthy brown, the barrel matte black, but the two were clearly from different manufacturers. The rings holding the scope had been hand-painted to reduce glare, the paint uneven. In places, the barrel wore scars, 1,000 tiny scratches that spoke of sand, rain, and years of use. It looked old, not neglected, but lived in. The kind of weapon that had seen things. "Holy shit," someone whispered. The words rippled outward, heads turned. Then the mountain moved. Marcus Kane stepped forward. Broad-shouldered, arms thick with muscle, ribbons stacked on his chest. He carried himself with the swagger of a man who had never failed at anything that mattered. His rifle was a flawless composition of matte black steel and silver accents. A sculpted masterpiece worth more than most annual salaries. Well, he drawled. Texas in every syllable. What do we have here? Did you fish that thing out of a pawn shop, sweetheart? The word dripped mockery. She kept her head down, checking the bolt for smooth travel. Kane leaned on the edge of her table, drawing a small crowd of teammates like moths to flame. That thing looks like Frankenstein's monster. Did you build it yourself out of spare parts? Maybe her daddy let her borrow his deer rifle. Another voice chimed in. Laughter followed, low and sharp. Sarah looked up, eyes dark, voice steady. It gets the job done. Kane grinned, slow and confident. Gets the job done, lady. This isn't some weekend warrior thing. This is the big leagues. Shots that separate the men from the boys. He patted his own rifle, the gesture almost intimate. This beauty's got a custom ground barrel worth more than your whole setup. Tolerances you can't even measure with the naked eye. You brought a Honda to a Ferrari race. The laughter rose again, but Sarah didn't join them. She just ran a hand along her rifle stock, checking for anything loose, anything off. The touch wasn't for them, it was for her. Across the room, Master Chief Rodriguez's gaze lingered. He'd seen hot shots before, men who thought money could buy precision. And he'd seen the quiet ones, the dangerous ones, who didn't need to speak to prove themselves. Sarah Chun didn't look rattled. She looked ready. All right, ladies. Rodriguez's voice cut the room in two. Playtime's over. The crowd dispersed, but Kane stayed a beat longer. He leaned closer, voice dropping. The heat in his words was different, now quieter. This isn't a feel-good diversity program, he said. When you wash out, and you will, don't expect any special treatment. I wouldn't want any, Sarah replied. Kane's smile returned, but it was colder. Good, because you're not gonna get any. He turned away. She felt the eyes on her, heavy, assessing, as she slid the rifle back into its case. This was a test, not of her skill that would come soon enough, but of her ability to exist here without flinching. She picked up the case. Again, the weight solid in her hands. Let them underestimate her. They had before, the next morning. The desert air was knife-sharp against her cheeks. She set her rifle on the shooting mat. Movements calm, unhurried. The range stretched out ahead, an ocean of sand and scrub, until it ended at the barely visible silhouette 800 yards away. Around her, the SEALs moved with the same casual confidence. She'd seen yesterday men who had never doubted they belonged at the top of the food chain. Kane's voice boomed across the line. Marine here might need some pointers on how real operators handle precision shooting. It drew the laughs he wanted. Rodriguez's voice cut through them. 800 yards, 10 rounds, prone supported, anything under expert. You're on the next flight home. Sarah opened her notebook. The cover was worn soft, the pages yellowed, filled edge to edge with ink. Her life as a shooter was written there, wind charts, temperature effects, humidity adjustments, every calculation by hand. Kane leaned over. Jesus Christ, is that a diary? His voice rose. What's next? You gonna pull out an abacus? The laughter bit, but she didn't look up. She found the page she needed. 800 yards, standard conditions. Ran her finger down the columns of numbers. Kane, meanwhile, caressed his ballistic computer like it was a living thing. Cost more than most people make in 6 months, he announced. Real-time analysis. Even accounts for the Earth's rotation. Sarah didn't look at him when she asked, what happens when the battery dies? For the first time, his smile faltered. What was worse, being mocked before you fired, or proving them wrong and knowing they'd come for you harder next time? The chill in the Nevada morning cut sharper now as Sarah settled into prone. Her mat lay flat on the cold sand, elbows anchored. The stock pulling in against her shoulder, like it had been waiting for her all night. She'd spent enough dawns like this to know when the world was holding its breath. Kane's expensive rifle caught the light, the matte black and silver edges gleaming even in the pale sun. His ballistic computer sat beside him like an altar screen alive with shifting numbers. Wind speeds, humidity levels, distance calculations. To the decimal, he typed in data with the confidence of a man who trusted machines more than his own bones. Sarah's own world was smaller. The scratch of paper, the weight of a pencil in her hand. The familiar pages of her notebook splayed open to the right numbers 800 yards. Standard conditions, cold morning air in the margins. Faint pencil smudges from years ago where her grandfather had made notes in his steady block print. She still hadn't erased them. Rodriguez's voice carried over the line. Wind 3 to 5, left to right. Temps 38, humidity 15%, 20 minutes. Sarah's mind turned the information over with practice speed. 2 clicks. Up for temperature, 1 left for wind. No theatrics, no ceremony. Just knowing Kane wasn't even behind his rifle yet. He was still watching his computer hum through the atmospheric layers, waiting for the perfect digital blessing. Her first shot broke the morning silence. The report rolled across the desert, a flat, clean sound. The recoil pushed back into her shoulder with familiar authority. And through her scope she saw the faint, sharp burst of white on the target's center ring. Dead perfect. A voice down the line muttered, "Lucky shot." But it didn't sound convinced. Her second shot landed 10 seconds later. Another center. Hit. She kept her breathing in rhythm. Inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4, hold. The trigger broke the same way every time. Smooth press. Follow through. Kane finally took his first shot. It was good 9 ring, solid hit. But it wasn't perfect. By her 5th round, Sarah's grouping was tight enough to punch through the same hole. The paper tore, edges curling in by Kane's 5th. His shots scattered across the black silhouette good. Shooting by most standards, but not the kind that made people stop and watch. And people were watching now. Conversations down the line went quiet. A few shooters lowered their own rifles to glance through spotting scopes, not at their own targets, but at hers. Her 7th round widened the ragged center hole by barely a fraction. Her 9th passed exactly through the same path, the scope's crosshairs unshaken. The desert wind carried the sound of her last shot clean and sharp. When Rodriguez called ceasefire, the silence was telling. No muttering now, no small jokes. The only sound was the soft metallic click of bolts opening. Sarah sat back on her knees and brought up her spotting scope. The target showed 10 perfect strikes in the X-ring, all within a circle smaller than a silver dollar. The kind of grouping snipers might get once in their careers. If they were lucky, Kane's target was good, respectable, but it wasn't hers. Chun, Sarah. Rodriguez called as he moved down the line with his clipboard. 10 rounds fired, 10 hits, all shots in the X-ring, score 100 points. It wasn't just the number that made the others shift. It was the finality in his tone. Perfect scores here weren't casual things. Kane Marcus, 10 rounds fired, 9 hits. Score 87. Kane didn't look up, his jaw flexed once. The rest of the morning went on like that. 600 yards, 1,000 moving targets. Wind reading drills. Sarah's notebook never left her side. Neither did the rhythm of her movements calculate. Adjust. Shoot. No wasted motion. No doubt. Every time. Her old, scarred rifle outperformed weapons that cost more than 10 times as much. And every time, Kane's smile thinned a little more by lunch. The heat had replaced the morning chill. The air smelled faintly of gunpowder and dust. Sarah sat by the equipment shed, cleaning her rifle, slow and careful. Kane's shadow fell across her table. "You know," he said, his voice low enough. "Not to carry. This morning was a fluke." She didn't look up. The patch of cloth in her hand moved over the barrel. "Steady, patient. Real sniping," he continued, "isn't about paper targets. It's about taking the shot when it matters. When there's more on the line than bragging rights." She met his eyes then, calm. "You're right. It's not about the targets." His mouth pulled into something. That was almost a smile, but not quite, so don't get too comfortable. "Marine, the real test's coming, and when it does, your little pea shooter isn't going to cut it." She returned her gaze to the rifle. She'd heard versions of that threat before, from instructors, from fellow Marines, from enemies. They all learned the same lesson eventually. It wasn't the rifle that made the shooter. The final day of the week felt wrong from the moment she woke. The air was still, too still, the kind of stillness that made soldiers glance over their shoulders. As if the world knew something they didn't, Sarah reached the range before sunrise. Rodriguez was already there, behind a massive spotting scope, staring into the desert distance. "Morning, Chun," he said without turning. "Master Chief." He finally looked at her, then nodded toward the horizon. "See that?" She followed. His gaze, it took a second, but she caught at a small square structure shimmering in the distance. How far? 3,520 yards, he said quietly. Just over 2 miles, even without a scope. She knew what that meant. At that distance, the bullet would be in the air nearly 6 seconds. 6 seconds where wind could push it sideways, temperature gradients could make it rise or fall, and the rotation of the Earth itself could nudge it off course. The others began to arrive, and the mood shifted. No one laughed. No one leaned casually on their rifles. 2 miles was the kind of shot most snipers only read about. Rodriguez's voice was even. "Today, we separate legends from the rest. Targets 18 inches square. Winds variable, humidity dropping, temperature gradients 15 degrees from here to there. You'll need to account for Coriolis." Kane stepped forward, confidence flickering back to life as he gestured at his rifle. "This is exactly why we invest in the best gear. Master Chief, my ballistic computer can handle all of it." Rodriguez just said, "We'll see." Kane's score from yesterday put him first. He approached the line like a man walking onto a stage. 20 minutes of calculations, measurements, adjustments. The shot rang out, echoing across the sand. 6 seconds later, a puff of dust, 200 yards short. The others tried. High-tech. Gear hummed and clicked. Predictions were made. The best of them landed within 50 yards of the target. None hit it. By the time it was Sarah's turn, the mood was resignation wrapped in curiosity. "This should be entertaining," Kane called. Though his voice didn't carry the same certainty, Sarah set her mat down, opened her notebook, and began to write. Why was no one breathing? The desert had a way of swallowing sound, but this was different. This was human. Every man on that line was holding his breath, whether they knew it or not, watching the Marine in the corner who'd been a punchline. Yesterday, Sarah opened her notebook, the cover bent back along the old crease, the pages worn smooth by years of sand, oil, and graphite. She ran her thumb down the margin of the right page. 3,520 yards. Variables noted in faded pencil. Her grandfather's handwriting was still there, neat and patient, next to her own cramped script. Rodriguez stood off to the side, arms folded. He didn't rush her. The others shifted. Reeves muttered something under his breath about a notebook for a moonshot. But his voice carried no heat now. It was defensive, nervous. Sarah ignored them. She started where she always started: range, elevation, wind. But at this distance, those were just the bones. She needed the muscle, the skin, the heartbeat, the layers of wind, each moving in its own stubborn direction. The thin air waiting halfway to the target. The way the morning sun would heat the ground faster than the air, bending the path in ways computers could predict but not feel. The numbers weren't abstract to her. They were physical, alive. She could see them, feel them. She scribbled, crossed, out, recalculated. 20 minutes passed. Kane's voice, low and needling. "You gonna take the shot before the sun sets?" She didn't answer. The scope turrets were worn smooth, but her fingers knew them like muscle memory. 2 full rotations up for elevation. 3 clicks left for wind. A quarter click more for Coriolis. The clicks were quiet, but in the still air, each one sounded loud enough to mark time. Finally, she lay down behind the rifle. The old stock fit into her shoulder as if it had been carved for her alone. Her breathing slowed. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold. The rest of the world dissolved. No Kane, no Reeves, no Rodriguez, no muttering behind her. Just crosshairs, wavering slightly in the mirage heat, settling each time she exhaled. The trigger broke clean. No drama, no extra motion. The rifle bucked into her shoulder, and then waiting. 6 seconds can feel like a lifetime when you've tied your skill, your reputation, and a piece of your own identity to the flight of a bullet. 6 seconds where the mind wants to doubt, replay the math, wonder if you accounted for every shift of air. Somewhere around the 3rd second, Sarah's heartbeat was the only sound in her ears. Around the 5th, she almost let herself breathe. Then the target erupted. A bright flash of sparks burst off the steel plate, spinning fragments of metal into the air. The echo of the impact rolled back across the sand, deep and final. For a moment, nothing happened. Then someone whispered, 2 miles, dead center. It wasn't celebration. It wasn't even disbelief. It was reverence. The kind that soldiers reserve for something they knew they might never see again. Kane didn't move. He stayed behind his spotting scope, as if the image might change if he looked long enough. Rodriguez's voice was low in the radio. Range control. Confirm target 7. Target 7 is destroyed, came the reply. Direct center hit. The confirmation didn't make a sound, but it landed like a detonation. Reeves actually took a step back. Another SEAL let out a sharp laugh, not because it was funny, but because there was nothing else to do with the disbelief in his chest. Sarah rolled her shoulder once, the recoil still lingering there, and began the process of clearing her rifle. No drama, no smile. Rodriguez walked toward her slowly. The crowd opened for him without a word. "May I?" he asked when he reached her table. She handed him the rifle, up close, the mismatched stock. The old rings, the scratches all told a different story, one of care, not neglect. The bedding work was meticulous, the trigger a study and controlled. Perfection. The barrel had been loved, even as it had been worked to exhaustion. "This is beautiful work," he murmured. "Who did the modifications?" "I did," Sarah said. "My grandfather taught me gunsmithing when I was 12. Said understanding your weapon was more important than owning an expensive one." He nodded. The words weren't new to him, but the proof standing before him made them weightier. Kane finally straightened, stepping away from his scope. His face wasn't red with anger this time. It was pale, like the hit had landed somewhere deeper than pride. "My computer had all the same data," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "More data." Sarah packed her rifle into the case. "Your computer told you what a bullet should do under perfect conditions. My notebook tells me what this bullet, from this rifle, will do under these conditions. I know its quirks. I know how it reacts to cold. I know the scope drifts left after the 3rd click. I know my hand loads behave differently at altitude." She looked at him, calm but not cruel. "Your computer knows theory. I know this rifle." The words landed like the shot itself, slow, deliberate, irreversible. Around them, the expensive rifles on the benches seemed smaller somehow. Reeves stepped closer. His tone changed. "You load your own ammo?" "Every round. Weigh each powder charge to the 10th of a grain. Sort bullets by weight. Measure every case for consistency." "How long's that take?" "About 20 minutes per round. I'm always careful." No one laughed. Rodriguez was still holding her rifle. "Your grandfather? Was he military?" "Marine sniper, Korea and Vietnam, 2 tours each. Came home. Spent 40 years perfecting his craft on civilian ranges. Could put 5 shots into a quarter at 1,000 yards with a rifle he built from surplus parts. And he taught you everything?" "Everything he could. Said marksmanship wasn't about the equipment. It was about knowing the fundamentals so deeply they become instinct." Kane stepped closer. His voice was quieter now, not for the crowd. "When you made that shot, Were you sure you could, or were you just hoping? I was confident in my preparation, she said. But at 2 miles, there are always variables you can't control. A gust of wind you don't see, a temperature change you didn't measure, a flaw in the bullet you didn't catch. The difference between hoping and knowing is preparation. I've spent 15 years preparing for shots like that, not because I expected to take them, but because I wanted to be ready if I ever had to. He extended his hand. She shook it firmly. "Thank you," he said, "for the lesson." As she walked toward the waiting transport, Rodriguez joined her. "In 12 years," he said, "only 3 people have made that shot. Hathcock in 67 with a mounted 50, a Delta operator in 09 with a custom rifle that cost more than a house, and now you with something that looks like it came out of a salvage bin." "It did," she said with a faint smile. "That's what makes it so impressive. You didn't buy your way here. You built it, one shot at a time." The truck pulled away. She looked back at the firing line. The SEALs were clustered around, their gear not showing off anymore, examining, questioning. Maybe they were starting to understand. The most important part of a rifle isn't the steel, or the scope, or the computer. It's the person behind it and how much they're willing to know. Why did it feel heavier coming back than it had going in? The transport hummed beneath her boots, the vibration running up her spine. Out the window, the desert stretched endlessly flat and empty, except for the shimmer of heat on the horizon. Behind her, the range was shrinking into a speck, but the memory of it, that wasn't going anywhere. Sarah sat alone on the bench seat. No one said a word to her, not even Rodriguez, who was across the aisle, arms crossed, eyes closed as if resting. She could still smell the faint mix of gunpowder and oil on her own sleeves. It wasn't the shot itself that weighed on her. It was what it meant. She'd felt it the second the sparks flew off that steel. Something had shifted. The men who'd mocked her, written her off, had seen the line between knowing and hoping, but she also knew that some of them would carry that lesson with a kind of resentment, the quiet kind that doesn't burn out quickly by the time the transport rolled up to the main compound. The Nevada sun had climbed high. The heat hit her like a wall as soon as the doors opened. She slung her duffel over one shoulder, the rifle case over the other. Rodriguez caught her before she reached the barracks. "Chun," she stopped. "You know they'll talk about this." He said, "Maybe not today, but it'll travel. I know. They'll tell the story, and each time it'll change. Some will leave out the part where they missed. Some will say you got lucky. Some will say the wind shifted just right." She didn't answer, but the ones who know? He gave a small nod. They'll remember exactly what they saw. His gaze held hers a moment longer. Then he stepped aside. Inside the barracks, the air was cooler, but the hum of conversation told her news had already spread. A couple of Marines she recognized from other units gave her small nods. No one asked questions. That was the thing about the best moments. They didn't always need to be spoken out loud. Still, that night, alone in her bunk, the silence pressed in. Her grandfather's voice came back to her, unbidden. She could still picture the old man at his workbench, the smell of hop snow 9 oil thick in the air, the small lamp casting a pool of light over whatever rifle lay in pieces before him. "Your weapon's like your shadow," he'd say, sanding the edge of a stock. "You carry it everywhere, even when you think you've left it behind." He'd never bragged about his own kills, even though she knew the numbers were there. He only talked about the work, the hours, the failures no one saw. "You keep your own record," he'd tell her, tapping her on the forehead. "Here, the day you stop learning your rifle is the day it stops listening to you." She'd been 12 the first time he let her fire a rifle he'd tuned himself. The recoil had nearly knocked her on her back, but she'd hit the can he'd set on the fence post. He didn't smile, didn't say, "Good job," just asked, "Could you do it again?" That was the lesson. One shot was luck, repeating it was skill. Doing it under pressure, when you couldn't afford to miss, that was something else entirely. Days passed. She expected to be sent back to her regular duties, maybe with a quiet commendation in her file that would get lost between transfers. Instead, an order came down: training deployment, classified destination, minimal details. Report to the airfield at 0500. When she got there, she saw Kane leaning against the side of a transport plane. Arms folded, Reeves was there too, along with 2 other SEALs she hadn't spoken to. No one was smiling, but there was no open hostility now either. Rodriguez stood at the foot of the ramp, clipboard in hand. "This isn't a competition," he said as they gathered. "You're going into the field for a live exercise. Targets are real. Stakes are real. I'm your oversight, not your commander. Your success or failure will be judged by the people we're working with on the ground." No one asked who "we" was. The kind of people Rodriguez meant didn't like their names spoken. He looked directly at Sarah. "You'll be working with Kane, spotter-shooter pair. Orders from above." Kane didn't react. He just picked up his gear and headed up the ramp. Sarah followed, the weight of her rifle case steady in her hand. The plane droned for hours. No one spoke much when they finally landed. The air that hit her smelled different, dry, but not desert dry. Mountain air, thin, sharp. They moved by vehicle for another 2 hours, winding into higher ground until the road turned to gravel. Then dirt. The base was nothing more than a set of prefabricated huts tucked into a rocky fold in the hills. A few camo nettings broke up the outline. There was no flag here, no formal gate. This wasn't a place that officially existed. Inside one of the huts, a man in plain fatigues and no insignia spread a map on the table. "Targets not military," he said. "Insurgent commander, moves light, fast, doesn't stay in one place long. Last confirmed position was here." He tapped a red mark on the map. "At 100 meters from your planned position. You'll have a narrow window when he surfaces. Might be 30 seconds, might be less." Kane studied the map in silence. Sarah did the same, tracing the terrain lines, noting the ridge angles, the wind patterns she could expect between them and the target point. The man's eyes moved between them. "You only get one shot at this." The hike-in was silent but brutal. The ground alternated between loose scree and patches of snow that crunched under their boots. Sarah carried the rifle low and close. Keeping the weight centered, Kane carried the spotter's kit, his own rifle slung. When they reached the ridge, they dropped low. Kane unfolded the spotting scope, setting it into position with slow precision. Sarah lay prone beside him, extending the bipod. Feeling the cold from the rock seep through her sleeves. "Wind's tricky," Kane said, scanning the valley below. 2 layers, maybe 3, and there's heat shimmer off the far slope. She didn't answer. She was already watching the air, reading it the way her grandfather had taught her, not just the grass bending, but the way it bent, not just the heat waves, but the rhythm of their movement. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The cold began to work its way into her fingers, even through her gloves. Finally, Kane's voice was tight. Movement. 2 o'clock. Near the compound wall, Sarah shifted the rifle, the world narrowing to the scope circle. There he was, head and shoulders above the wall for just a second, talking to someone below. She let the crosshairs settle, her breathing slowing. The shot wasn't impossible, but it wasn't simple either. At this distance, even a half-second delay in reading the wind could push it wide. Kane's voice was in her ear now. Giving the wind call, range confirmation, she processed it, compared it to what she saw herself, adjusted half a click off his number. She felt his glance, but he didn't question it. The target turned slightly. Gesturing, she squeezed. The trigger broke like dry glass. The rifle's recoil came straight into her shoulder. A clean, sharp push, and then the world went into that strange, elastic time that Sarah knew too well when your body knows you've committed, but your mind is still racing ahead, trying to see the outcome before it arrives. The bullet was in the air for just under 3 seconds. But in those seconds, she thought about things she shouldn't have. The first was the click she'd felt in the scope turret, slightly rough, like grit under a fingernail. She filed it away for later. The second was the sound of Kane's breathing beside her, shallow but steady. The third was her grandfather's voice. Don't chase the shot. Let it come to you. Through the scope. She saw the shimmer twist in the valley air. For a heartbeat, she thought it had pushed her round too far right. Then the man by the wall jerked backward. Not dramatically. Not like in the movies, just as if the world had pulled him off balance. A second later, the faint metallic ping of impact drifted back up the ridge. Kane's voice was low. Hit. The spotter's scope confirmed it. The man lay still against the wall. The figure who'd been speaking with him vanished from sight. Below, movement burst like ants scattering from a disturbed mound. Sarah eased her cheek from the stock, slow and deliberate. She didn't look away from the target area until Kane tapped the back of her arm. Time to move, he said. They broke down the rifle and scope in practiced silence. The wind was picking up now, rattling the dead grass against the rocks. The hike back to the extraction point felt longer, though their pace was steady. Sarah carried the rifle across her chest, keeping the muzzle low, her mind already running through the sequence she'd just executed. Not out of doubt, but habit, looking for any point where she could have been faster, cleaner, better. Kane didn't speak until they were within sight of the hut again. You adjusted off my wind call, he said. You were reading the near layer, she replied. The far layer was stronger. The shimmer was moving faster on the slope past the wall. He gave a small grunt, not disagreement, recognition. Inside the hut, the man in plain fatigues waited. He didn't ask for a report, didn't congratulate them, just said, target confirmed. Pack your gear, your wheels up in 30. That was it. The ride back down the mountain was cramped. Kane, Sarah, and two of the others packed into the back of the vehicle with their gear. The silence wasn't hostile, but it was heavy, like the air before a storm. It wasn't until they reached the airfield that Kane broke it. You didn't flinch, he said. She glanced at him. Should I have? He shook his head. Some do. First time they take a live shot outside a war zone. This wasn't my first, she said quietly. He didn't push. On the flight back, Rodriguez stopped by her seat. Mission went clean, he said. Seemed that way. You're not asking why. She shook her head. Need to know, right? His mouth quirked slightly. Something like that, but you should know. The man you hit wasn't just a tactical target. He was political. Someone's going to be asking about that shot for a long time, and they'll get a very short answer. She studied his face. Why tell me? Because sometimes the shot you take isn't the only one you're responsible for. Sometimes it's the ones that don't get taken. He didn't explain further. Back at the training compound, Sarah expected to fade back into the usual schedule, but something had shifted. People she didn't know stopped her in the mess hall to ask about the wind that day, the slope, the elevation calls. Kane surprised her the most. He sought her out 2 days later, pulling up a chair at her table. I've been thinking about that 2-mile shot, he said. She didn't answer. You weren't just calculating, he went on. You were remembering. It was like you'd already taken it before you even settled in. I'd taken 1,000 versions of it, she said. None of them at that exact range and those exact conditions. But I knew the rifle. The rest is just adjusting. Variables, that's what I don't get, he said. I've got 15 years behind the rifle, more matches than I can count, but you've got something different. It's not just skill, it's patience. Her grandfather's voice again. Don't rush the shot. The target will still be there when your breath steadies. It's not patience, she said. It's respect. For the process, for the fact that you only control so much. Kane leaned back, studying her. Guess I'm still learning that. That night, she pulled the rifle from its case in the barracks. The light was dim, the room empty except for her. She ran a patch through the barrel, checked the bedding, adjusted. The bipod tension, not because it needed it, but because this was how you stayed ready. She opened her notebook to a blank page, wrote the date, wrote the location, the conditions, the distance, and then, at the bottom, she wrote one line: respect the rifle, respect the shot. 3 days later, she was called to Rodriguez's office. "You're being reassigned," he said without preamble. "To where?" He slid a folder across the desk. She didn't open it right away. "It's not permanent," he added. "Call it alone. They want you on a joint tasking. Same skills, different environment. Urban?" He nodded. "Long lanes, but cluttered. More eyes on you than you'll like. And the real trick," he paused, leaning back, "is knowing when not to take the shot." Her fingers tapped lightly on the folder. "Why me? You already proved you can hit when it matters. Now, we'll see if you can hold when it matters more." Why was the hardest part sometimes keeping your finger off the trigger? The plane dropped into the city under cover of night. Sarah caught glimpses of streetlights through breaks in the clouds. The yellow pools smeared by rain on the windows. The air smelled different here: oil, wet concrete, a faint bite of smoke that lingered even at altitude. Her orders were bare bones, embedded with a small joint team, eyes on a target moving in crowded civilian zones. The man was dangerous, well-connected, and protected by a constant churn of bodyguards and bystanders. There would be no clean, empty lanes here. Every angle would come with a shadow. The team's staging area was a rented flat 2 stories above a corner cafe. From the outside, it looked like nothing: a flickering neon beer sign in the window, cracked paint on the door. Inside, the front room had been stripped bare, replaced with maps, aerials, and live video feeds from street cameras. Rodriguez wasn't here this time. Her point of contact was a lean, quiet army warrant officer named Greer. His handshake was brief, his eyes already on the maps. "You're the shooter," he said. "We've got a couple fixed hides, but we'll shift positions daily. Target's routine isn't tight, but he's unpredictable, changes vehicles. Changes routes. If you get the window, you'll know it. But you don't take it unless you're 100% sure you can clear civilians." "I understand," Sarah said. "You'd better. One bad frame on the evening news, and this whole city burns hotter." The first day was all glass work. Sarah spent hours behind binoculars and spotting scopes, mapping out lines of fire that might only exist for seconds. Rooftop sightlines, upper-story windows in abandoned apartments, the occasional gap between buildings where a vehicle might pass into view. The problem wasn't distance. It was clutter, clotheslines, satellite dishes, neon signs, pedestrians with shopping bags. Even when the lanes opened, they closed again just as fast. By evening, she was in her first hide 4 stories up, prone on a dusty floor, rifle angled through a broken window. Kane wasn't here this time. Her spotter was Greer himself, steady and quiet beside her. "Vehicle," he murmured after an hour, through the scope. She tracked the convoy as it nosed into view. 2 SUVs, tinted windows. The target's profile might be in either. The gap between the first and second vehicle offered a clean shot at chest height. If the right man stepped out, she adjusted her breathing, feeling the weight of the rifle settle. Then a child darted into the street, chasing a ball. The driver braked hard, the convoy hesitating for 3 seconds before accelerating again. The window was gone. Greer didn't say anything. Neither did she. The second day was worse. They set up in an unfinished building across from a marketplace. The target was rumored to make a stop there, but the stalls were thick with people. Bright tarps flapped in the wind, the smell of roasting meat drifting up to their perch. 2 hours passed before a ripple went through the crowd, bodyguards moving in a tight diamond around a stocky man in a dark coat. Sarah settled the crosshairs on him as he paused to shake someone's hand. Through the scope, she could see the man's face clearly now. This was the target. But there was a problem. A woman in a headscarf was moving past, pushing a stroller. The baby inside shifted, a bright red blanket covering most of its body. The stroller's arc would cross directly in front of the shot path. She could have waited another second for the lane to clear, but that was also when the man's bodyguard shifted, blocking his torso completely. The chance evaporated. Greer exhaled slowly beside her. You could have taken it before she crossed. I wouldn't gamble on the stroller's speed, Sarah said. He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. By the fourth day, the tension wasn't just in her shoulders. It was in the whole team. Each missed opportunity fed the unspoken question. Was she being too careful? That afternoon, a radio burst cracked through the static. Target on the move. East Quarter, Building 6, 2 floors up, balcony side. They moved fast. Setting up in a narrow alley opposite the building, Sarah dropped to a knee behind a stack of pallets. The rifle braced against the corner. The balcony door opened. The man stepped out. Alone, phone pressed to his ear. She had him dead center. Distance was nothing less than 400 meters. The wind was still, and movement inside the room behind him. A young boy, maybe 8, wandered into view, glancing curiously at the phone in the man's hand. Sarah's cheek pressed harder into the stock. The boy stepped closer, pointing at something on the phone screen. The man laughed. The shot was gone. Greer's voice was tight. That was clean before the kid came out. It wasn't clean anymore. He didn't argue. But she saw his jaw flex as he lowered the spotter's scope. That night, in the flat above the cafe, the room was quieter than usual. 2 of the team were cleaning weapons at the far table. Greer sat at the map wall, marking the day's positions. Sarah stripped her rifle, laying the pieces out on the worn cloth. Her hands moved without hurry, but her mind was elsewhere, on the half-second shifts between having the shot and losing it. Her grandfather's words came back again. Sometimes the hardest shot is the one you don't take, because it's still yours. You're still the one who decided. She wondered if Cain would have taken them. Probably. Maybe he'd be praised for it. Maybe he'd be cursed. Greer spoke without looking up. Command's getting impatient. They didn't send us here to watch him buy coffee. They sent us here to end it, she said. Ending it wrong would be worse, he didn't reply. The break came on the 6th day. The target's vehicle pulled into a narrow street lined with shuttered shops. No market crowd, no pedestrians, just a single old man sitting on a stoop 50 meters back from the curb. From their position 2 floors up in a boarded window, Sarah had a clear lane from muzzle to target door. Greer's voice was low. This is it. The door opened. The man stepped out. No bodyguards visible. Sarah's breathing slowed, her focus tightening until the world outside the scope blurred. Then she saw it, the reflection of another figure. In the SUV's rear window, the glass distortion made it hard to tell. But she thought she saw the outline of a smaller body. Seated, unmoving, she didn't fire. The man re-entered the SUV after a short exchange with the driver, and the convoy pulled away. Greer turned toward her, disbelief flickering across his face. Why? Rear seat. Looked like a kid. Couldn't confirm, but I wasn't going to find out the wrong way. He sat back, rubbing a hand over his mouth. Command's not going to like it. Neither would I. How do you explain to people who only see results why you didn't pull the trigger? Back at the safe flat, the room was tighter than it had been in days. Greer's tone over the sat phone was clipped, almost mechanical as he delivered the report. Up the chain, Sarah sat on the edge of the table, rifle across her knees, listening to the fragments of the other side's voice bleeding through the speaker short. Sharp questions she couldn't make out in full. Greer hung up without turning around. He set the phone down hard enough to make the map shift on the wall. They want it done tomorrow, he said finally. No more holding. Sarah kept her voice even. If there was a kid in that car, pulling the trigger would have. They don't care. He turned now, eyes tired. They care about him not walking around to cause more damage. You think there's time to wait for a picture perfect frame? There isn't. I'm not going to fire through a maybe, she said. Greer studied her, his expression unreadable. You've got a lot of convictions for someone in your position. Conviction's the only reason I can live with what I've done. He didn't argue, but he didn't nod either. The team was quiet that night. No one said much over the ration packs. The unspoken current in the room was simple. Sarah's choice had kept them here longer than planned. Longer meant more risk. Lying in her bunk later, she stared at the ceiling. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the other room the only sound. She thought about her grandfather again, not the careful gunsmith, but the man who'd once told her about the first time he'd been ordered to take a shot he didn't believe in. They can order you to pull the trigger, he'd said, but you're the one who has to live with what comes out of the barrel. That night, she didn't sleep much. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining under a pale sky. The target's routine, such as it was, had started again. Movement between known locations, bodyguards in heavier numbers now. Someone had told him to be more careful. They set up in a half-collapsed apartment building overlooking a side street. The windows were jagged holes, the floor littered with debris. Greer was on the scope, Sarah prone beside him, her bipod legs sunk into the dust. He's doing 10. Greer murmured. The street below was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't feel natural. A stray dog trotted past, stopped, sniffed at something in the gutter, then moved on. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed, then engines. 2 vehicles rolled into view, slowing to a stop just short of the intersection. The second SUV's rear window was darker than before, but not fully opaque. Sarah's eyes stayed on the scope. She could make out movement inside, but it was too distorted to identify. The front passenger door opened. It wasn't the target. Just one of the guards, scanning the rooftops, then the rear driver's side door opened, and the man stepped out. No one else followed. Greer's voice was low. Lane's clear. Sarah's breathing slowed. Confirming no civilians, she said. You're clean, Greer replied. His tone had that edge now, half warning, half order. She hesitated a fraction too long, and the man turned toward the building, not directly at her. But the shift was enough to make him start moving again. You're going to lose it, Greer said sharply. Her finger was on the trigger, pressure building. Then, from the corner of her sightline, a woman emerged from a doorway 20 meters behind the target, carrying a bundle of laundry. The wind caught a sheet in her arms, ballooning it outward into the space between Sarah and the shot. Half a second. That was all the time she had to decide. Her finger eased off. The target stepped into the SUV again, the door shutting, engines revving as the convoy pulled away. Greer exhaled hard, almost a laugh but not amused. Commands. Going to lose their minds. They can put someone else in this hide, she said, folding the bipod. You think they won't? They'll do it just to prove a point. Let them. The debrief that evening was worse than she'd expected. Greer handled most of it, but when the voice on the other end of the sat phone asked directly why the shot wasn't taken, he handed it to her. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't give them any anger to twist into something else. Line was clear until the last second. Civilian entered the path. Firing would have risked hitting her. I made the decision not to fire. Silence on the other end then. That's... The third opportunity passed. Yes, Sarah said. The line went dead. Afterward, Greer sat back, rubbing his temples. They'll either pull you or push you harder. Not sure which yet. I don't need them to like my decisions, she said quietly. I just need to be able to stand by them. He looked at her for a long moment, then gave a short nod. Fair enough. The next morning, she was woken at 0:43 by a knock on the doorframe of her bunk. One of the younger operators, Kellen, stood there. They want you on the roof, he said. It was still dark when she climbed the narrow stairs to the roof. Greer was there, binoculars raised, scanning the city as it stirred awake. We've got movement. he said without preamble. Informal meet, no security perimeter. Just him and two men we don't recognize. If we're gonna take him without collateral, this is it. The location was a rooftop cafe 3 blocks away. Early morning, no customers yet. Just the clink of cups and the faint drift of voices. From her position, Sarah had a direct line to the table. No wind, no glare, no civilians in the path. Greer's voice was calm. You've got the green light. Through the scope, she watched the man sip his coffee, gesture at something on the table. His two companions leaned in. No one else was visible on the roof. Her breathing slowed. This was as clean as it would get, but something tugged at her, an unease she couldn't place. She shifted the magnification, scanning the background. There on the far corner of the rooftop, behind a stack of crates, a figure crouched, too small to be one of the guards. Hands clutching the edges of the crate, eyes barely visible over the top. A child, watching, not in the line of fire, not physically at risk, but close enough. To see everything, her finger hovered. How do you measure a shot? The distance it travels, or the weight it carries? The crosshairs were steady on the man's chest. The air was still. The table, the coffee, the faint curl of steam, nothing moved fast here. The target's voice was low, almost conversational, as if he were discussing weather instead of the kind of decisions that got people killed. 3 blocks away, Sarah lay prone, her cheek against the worn stock, breathing slow. She had every clearance. No wind, no glass. No civilians in the path dot except for the eyes. The child behind the crates hadn't moved. Just crouched there, watching Dot, not in danger, not physically, but close enough that if she took the shot, his world would split in two. Her finger tightened slightly on the trigger, then eased. Greer's voice was quiet in her earpiece. You're clear, Chun. Take it. She didn't answer. The target leaned back in his chair, laughing at something one of his companions said. The sound didn't carry, but she could imagine it confident, careless, certain of his safety. Her breathing stayed even, but inside, her mind was running the numbers, not the ballistic ones. The ones no one wrote down, the kind where a clean kill could still cause a mess you couldn't undo. Her grandfather's voice came again, uninvited. A rifle doesn't know right from wrong. That's on you. She watched for another 10 seconds. The child shifted, edging toward the table, maybe to get a better look. Her decision settled like a stone in water. She eased her finger fully off the trigger. Negative, she murmured. Not taking it. Greer didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was flat. Command's not going to like it. They can put that in the report, she said. They stayed in position another 5 minutes, watching as the meeting ended. The target stood, shook hands, and walked back toward the stairwell. The boy slipped away behind the crates, unseen by the men. When the rooftop was empty, Sarah broke down the rifle. No rush, no guilt in her movements. She'd made her call. The extraction back to the flat was silent. The debrief was short and sharp. On the sat phone, Command's voice was tighter than before. This was your chance. The cleanest window you've had. There was a civilian on the rooftop, Sarah said. In the line of fire? No. Then why didn't you take it? She didn't hesitate. Because there's more to clean than the shop path. The line was quiet for a moment. Then, we'll be reevaluating your role. Understood. The call ended. Later, as the team packed gear for departure, Greer came over. He leaned against the wall, arms folded. I don't agree with you, he said. But I understand you. Sarah looked up from her rifle case. That's enough. You know you might not get another tasking like this. I didn't take the job for the taskings, she said. I took it to do it right. He nodded. Once, then pushed off the wall. The flight back to base was long. Rain streaked the windows as the city lights faded behind them. Sarah kept the rifle case on her lap, her fingers tracing the edge of the latch. She thought about the boy's eyes, not afraid, not yet, curious. She'd been that age when her grandfather first let her sit at the bench, watching him work. He hadn't shielded her from what a rifle could do, but he'd made her understand what it meant to choose. Every round you send, he told her, is a piece of you leaving with it. Make sure you can live without it. When she landed, Rodriguez was waiting at the hangar. I heard, he said. From command? From Greer. And command. Then, you know, I didn't take the shot. I know. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. You'll take heat for it. I can take it. That's not what I mean. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. The kind of heat that doesn't show up in reports. The kind that follows you into rooms, into assignments. You'll be the one they say is too careful, too slow, too moral. Sarah met his gaze. I'd rather be that than the one who made the wrong call. Rodriguez's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Careful. That kind of thinking has a way of making you a leader when you're not looking. In the days that followed, Sarah returned to her regular training schedule. The compound felt smaller now, less about competition, more about keeping herself sharp. Kane caught her in the mess hall one afternoon. Heard about the op? He said. I figured you would. You passed twice. 3 times. He studied her, then nodded slowly. Most wouldn't have. Most aren't me. He chuckled once low. Guess not. You keep doing things like that, people are going to start thinking you're dangerous. In the ways that matter. That night, she sat alone in the armory, her rifle laid out before her. She cleaned it the way her grandfather had taught her, slow, deliberate, checking each part by touch as much as sight. When she was done, she opened her notebook. She flipped past pages filled with ranges, wind calls, elevation corrections. Past the 2-mile shot notes. Past the mission data from the mountains. She found a blank page. She wrote the date, the location, and then beneath it. Sometimes the hardest trigger pull is the one you don't make. The next morning, Rodriguez found her on the range, working a slow string at 1,000 yards. You're still here, he said. Where else would I be? He nodded toward the target, downrange 10 shots, all in the X-ring. You know, he said, in the field, most people think the shot is the story. But it's not. The real story's in the shooter, in why they pull or don't. That's the part people never stop talking about. Sarah lowered the rifle, the barrel warm against her hand, then let them talk. As the sun climbed higher, she packed her gear. In the distance, the desert shimmered under the heat, stretching out beyond sight. Somewhere out there were shots she might one day take, and others she wouldn't. The rifle case closed with a solid click. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts, and sometimes it holds its fire.